Breaking news that President Trump, for now, pausing all U.S. military aid to Ukraine until he determines that the Ukrainians are actually showing some good faith peace negotiations commitment. And a senior Trump administration official is telling Fox this is not a permanent termination of aid. It's a pause.
So there was the news breaking last night on the Ingram show. That's when it came out that the United States has talked about it, a temporary pause, initiated a temporary pause on military aid, waiting for good faith negotiations, peace negotiations to come back into play. We wanted to get somebody on here who could walk us through where we are right now in this negotiation, or whatever you might want to call it, with Zelensky, Ukraine, and President Trump. We welcome former United States Senator from Missouri, Senator Jim Talent, to the show, also the chairman of the Reagan Institute's National Leadership Council. Thank you, Senator, for being with us here today. It's great to have you.
Hey, thanks for asking me, Annie.
You bet. You know, I wanted to get your open thoughts on where we are right now, trying to achieve peace between Russia and Ukraine. Lots has transpired. What are you thinking right now about where peace might be acquired between these two countries?
Well, I think the opportunity for a deal that is in our interests and also in Ukraine's interests is still very strong. So we got involved in the war because of the old saw, you know, the enemy of my adversary is my friend, and Russia under Putin had made itself the adversary of the United States, not just in Eastern Europe, but also in the Middle East, and with their unlimited friendship for China. But I wrote 2 years ago that it was not in our interest as a country to finance indefinitely a static battlefield, which is what it looked very much to me like it was going to become. And it's not in Ukraine's interest either to fight a war of attrition. And so the obvious deal is basically a ceasefire more or less along existing lines. Ukraine gets rebuilt, and it ought to be with European money. And then there is some kind of an effective guarantee going forward to protect against further aggression. Russia, meanwhile, gets out of the war. And there may be some other sweeteners in there, like lowering sanctions, which they've talked about. And that's what Trump was headed to. I don't even think it was a policy choice so much as just an inevitable recognition of reality that this war going on like this isn't in anybody's benefit. So that's what the deal needed to be. Now, they were proceeding towards that. And the obvious point of this rare earth minerals deal was to knit Ukraine more closely to the United States and to the West so that we would have an interest in protecting their sovereignty in the future. Is also a very good deal for us because we need their rare earth minerals, and a good deal for them because it would help rebuild the country. So that's the background. Now, real quickly, when Zelensky did what he did, whether he intended to do it or he just blew up or both, effectively, in the context of negotiation, what he was saying was, well, I don't think President Trump will dare exercise the leverage to try and get me to the table by cutting off or suspending military aid. Well, if you're the president, the only way you can respond to that in the context of negotiations is to show, no, actually, I do have that leverage over you. And that's what the president did. I mean, it had to follow. The logic of negotiations meant it had to follow. And Zelensky has now said, oh, gee, this was all very regrettable. I really do want peace. I think we can negotiate. So I'm hopeful that this will be a bump in the road, and I think that's probably what President Trump believes. And I'll just say, Annie, this was never going to be easy, but it's necessary. And I think, you know, Trump is right that he's the one to do it.
We're speaking with Senator Jim Talent here on the Annie Frey Show. I'm wondering how much of what takes place all the time in negotiations. It's just so rare that we, via the press, are privy to be able to see this type of negotiation taking place. Is this common, the way the back and forth took place, maybe in a more private setting, and it's just odd that we were able to take it in?
Well, it's common for President Trump to be more transparent publicly than most presidents would be. And, you know, he talks about tactics publicly, but no, I would have to say this was pretty extraordinary. You know, there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into these, you know, president-to-president meetings. And it's very clear, I mean, everybody has said this, that this was supposed to be Zelensky coming in, They do the handshake, the mutual compliments. They sign the agreement. They have lunch, and he goes home. And it was clear that that's what the Ukrainians had committed to doing, and what the United States had committed to doing. And to blow it up publicly like that, I'm not a diplomat, Annie, but I know enough about it to know, yes, that was pretty extraordinary. And as I said, really after that, I don't think the American government had much choice. But if it wanted to get the negotiations back on track, but to do what we did, and it worked.
We're speaking with the chairman of the Reagan Institute's National Leadership Council, and of course, former United States Senator from Missouri, Jim Talent. Can I ask you some questions, or maybe just an open question about the minerals deal? Because I hear a lot of people read a lot about, in short form on X posts and stuff about what the minerals deal entails. Some people saying the United States is going to go over to Ukraine and pillage their land and take all of their rare earth. What is the minerals deal exactly?
Well, rare earth minerals, and there's a number of different ones, they're extremely valuable and they're necessary to a sophisticated economy. The Chinese right now have the lion's share of them, in particular the lion's share of the processing of them. That's a security risk in addition to being an economic liability for us and indeed for the rest of the world. So Ukraine has a number of those rare earth minerals. They can't develop them because, well, yes, they're fighting a war now, but they don't have the means. They don't have the capital. They don't have the technology. They don't have the workforce. They don't have the companies to develop them. So this is a natural opportunity for the United States to invest there. No, we were never going to it wasn't a case where they had to give us their rare earth minerals. It was a case where we would develop it, and then there would be a sharing in the profits because they own them, right? Mm-hmm. And so it would be beneficial for us from a number of different standpoints. The broader sense, because what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to say, look, a security guarantee without the kind of connections between Ukraine and the West that give us a reason to try and defend them is not going to protect Ukraine, and it's not going to help us. And so he's saying this serves both foreign policy and security purposes and economic purposes and helps us get supply chains independent of China. It's a win-win for everybody, which is probably the reason the administration proposed it. And it's something Ukraine needed to go along with. I think Zelensky is having difficulty backing away from his maximalist goals, but Putin's going to have to do the same thing. I mean, Putin wants to detach the entirety of 4 provinces in the east, which he has not conquered. He wants Ukraine to agree never to arm itself again, and he wants us to agree not to sell them arms. And he's not going to get any of that. And Ukraine is not going to get a commitment to try and force Russia out of Crimea. They tried to do that with an offensive in 2023, and it failed. So we're going to go back to the status quo ante from a territory standpoint. Russia will probably get a little more territory. And then we're going to do what we should have done, and Trump tried to do, which is develop the kind of relationship which will be a deterrent to further aggression in the future and will stabilize Europe.
Senator Talent, this is obviously something that's being shared by a political party with a lot of political ramifications, consequences. I think that's the intention, at least. But in your expertise, is Donald Trump cozying up to Vladimir Putin?
No, I mean, and not broadly speaking, and not with regard to Ukraine either. I mean, Trump is the only president who actually armed the Ukrainians. He also put sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline, which the Europeans didn't want because their policy at the time was to be dependent on Russian energy. Trump went over there and said, this is dumb. You're dependent on somebody who does not have your interests in mind. So, no, that's just not true. It's just if you want to – Ukraine's not going to win this war. We have to have an agreement. An agreement has to be signed by both sides. And as Trump said, if you're trying to be an honest broker, which is what he wants to do, you don't accomplish that by attacking either side. And so I'm not going to go around attacking Vladimir Putin when I want him to sign an agreement. That doesn't mean he's going to give him what he wants. They're both going to have to compromise.
Senator Talent, after the confrontation in the Oval Office on Friday, there was a flurry of comments. You'll notice the trend here. I'm referring to things that are read on X because this is where a lot of talking happens. And I know that you know very much so that talking is a lot different than action. When you see these world leaders, these people representing countries all over the place saying, I stand with Ukraine, and then we see, the UK saying, we're gonna support you, we're gonna back you, so on and so forth. Do these countries have the ability to provide Ukraine what the United States was offering to provide Ukraine in lieu of the United States being involved at all?
No, I mean they can assist, but they've allowed the defense establishments to atrophy. They're basically virtually disarmed. I wrote a column about 10 years ago, which I pointed out that the Germans, who used to have a very strong army, had used broomsticks in their training exercises because they didn't have enough rifles. So, they're very fierce in their rhetoric, but not in war or in preparing for war. And Putin, no aggressor, Putin or anybody else is going to be deterred, by promises or rhetoric. They're going to be deterred by nations tending to their interests, developing common interests with allies and partners, and then preparing to defend them, which is why the Trump administration, and in fact every administration, Trump was certainly not the only ones to do this, have insisted that the NATO allies, and in particular the Western Europeans, have to start spending more money on their defense. I mean, they're going to continue to need American leadership, certain American command, certain American specialties like intelligence. They're going to need American support, but they can be doing a lot more than they're doing. And if they value the alliance, that's what they'll do. But they've worked themselves into this rhythm of, the Americans do everything for them. And then, by the way, they never hesitate to criticize us.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to, this is not a healthy relationship. And every president's been saying this. They need to do more, particularly with regard to Europe. And they can. The war has shown, Annie, that Putin's ground forces are not that strong. Really, the Europeans, if they were to establish, and they would need our help with this, but if they were to establish a base in Eastern Europe, say in Poland, the Poles are doing very well in terms of preparing. 5 or 6 brigades, several of them armored brigades, some air power, the supporting infrastructure. That would be pretty effective in deterring any kind of aggression against NATO or, for that matter, Ukraine. And that's well within their capabilities to do. They just haven't been doing it. They talk about it, but they don't do it. So, look, my attitude is if they want to be more independent and develop their defenses and take more responsibility, I'm fine with that. They think it's threatening us. It's not. We have other fish to fry.
That's right. That's what Donald Trump has been saying in so many different ways that we can't be relied on and the only people in the game, that everyone needs to participate in a more equal fashion. And maybe this helps get that job done. Senator Talent, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for those thoughts, those well thought out views on all of this, because it's complicated for people, and everybody who is in short form response on platforms like X, they're just trying to get a political gain out of it. And we know this is a longer game than that.
Yep. And it's a pleasure to be with you, Annie. Hope we can do it again.
I would look forward to that. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Jim Talent, former United States Senator from Missouri, chairman of the Reagan Institute's National Leadership Council. Great to have him on the show.